Hello and welcome to this Rodale Institute webinar. We're going to look at the organic versus conventional profit margins today. My name is Dean Dickel, and I'm an organic crop advisor under Rodale's Consulting Services Department. My wife, Mary, and I live in Mineral Point, a small rural town in what is known as the Driftless area in southwest Wisconsin. We're both retired from full-time employment. Mary still does freelance writing for the local newspaper, and I work during the growing season as an organic inspector in addition to my work with Rodale. This webinar will focus on the current status of organic farming methods versus the established conventional system of row crop farming typically found here in the upper Midwest. We'll take a look at how these farming systems stack up in the areas of agronomics, carbon footprint, and most importantly, economics. I will also examine how my 30-year plus of being around organic agriculture as a journalist, producer, and inspector comparts with Rodale's history, research, and advocacy compared to what I see on the ground here in the Midwest. My path to Rodale is a kind of long and winding road, so I'm hoping you'll indulge me a few minutes as I recount my involvement in agriculture, the organic movement, and why I believe I'm qualified to discuss the status of these competing farming systems. I grew up on a crop and livestock farm in eastern Iowa in the 1960s and 70s, when virtually all of our neighbors raised livestock, mostly hogs and beef cattle, and farms then were hardly ever more than 300 acres. I was an active member of our FFA chapter, elected chapter president as a senior in high school, and I competed in public speaking contests as well. Following graduation, I earned a scholarship from DeKalb Seeds and enrolled in animal science at Iowa State University, where my father had graduated some 20 years earlier with degrees in agronomy and economics. Unfortunately, I did not inherit my dad's grasp of agronomy and economics. I enjoyed and excelled in courses like animal science and bacteriology, but not in chemistry and the pure sciences. So when one of our older neighbors called and asked if I wanted to rent his 400-acre farm, I left school and decided to begin a career in farming sooner rather than later. In hindsight, 1976 was probably the worst time in history to enter farming. By 1980, the Reagan administration was dismantling the government farm support system in favor of fence row to fence row farming, and the adage of farm for the market, not the government, became a growing mantra. Combined with record high interest rates and debt, my dream of becoming a farmer like my father was dead in its tracks. To this day, I prefer to call myself a survivor and not a victim of the 80s farm crisis. I've always said that when one door closes, a new one opens. And that new door for me at that time was journalism. I left farming behind and enrolled in a 2-year community college. And upon completion of a communications degree, I took a job as editor of a small town newspaper near where I grew up in Iowa. Journalism allowed me to stay close to my rural roots and write about issues like the aftermath of the farm crisis and, for instance, the 1988 drought. My journalism career eventually took me to the Dubuque Telegraph-Herald, where I went to work as the newspaper's ag reporter. The 1990s were fertile ground for a young enterprising reporter like myself, who liked to count consumers as well as farmers among my audience for agricultural news. There was no shortage of controversy at the time. The powers to be in industrial agriculture were busy promoting the hormone BST to the dairy industry, and genetically modified crops were just coming onto the market. So it was probably just dumb luck that I also found myself at the epicenter of the organic farming movement. At the center of the movement was the Firebrand Farm Group, the National Farmers Organization known as the NFO. NFO members established the Coulee Region Organic Product Pool, also known as CROP, on March 10th, 1988, with 57 farms joining forces and a plan to produce 20,000 pounds of organic milk every other day. The Organic Valley and Organic Prairie brands are the result of those 57 original members, and organic dairy, meat, eggs, and produce are distributed nationwide. To this day, the producer checks are issued through NFO. I got to know many of the people at the forefront of the organic movement at that time, including Keith Wilson of Cuba City, who I still consider a dear friend to this day. I met and interviewed people like Gary Zimmer, the founder of Midwestern BioAg, Charlie Opitz, a pioneer in rotational grazing, and Bill Welsh of Lansing, Iowa, who was one of the first proponents of producing organic meat chickens and turkeys from organic grain. Once again, however, a door was about to close on me. The newspaper's business model was being demolished by free internet news and advertising. So when I was offered an early retirement package around 1996, I took it and ran. Getting back to agriculture as a farmer had been beckoning for some time. The market for organic food looked good, and I had learned a lot about this so-called new method of farming. My wife and I bought a 7.5-acre farm near Shullsburg, Wisconsin, and began by producing organic broilers, turkeys, and eggs under the brand name New Century Farm. We marketed our products to food co-ops, Whole Foods, major retailers and restaurants in Madison and Milwaukee. Our customers became our friends, and we maintained the business relationship for more than 20 years until deciding to sell after our children graduated from high school. About 7 years ago, we moved to our present home in Mineral Point and refused to call ourselves retired, although we do enjoy the freedom of deciding where and how much we do want to work. My work as an inspector allows me to have my boots on some 60 farms, spring, summer, and fall. I love the face-to-face engagement with organic farmers, and I learn so much from them. Adding consultant to my resume was an obvious choice for me. I see myself as a conduit of information and knowledge. So that brings us up to date on my history and why I'm speaking today. At this point, please note the rules of engagement for the webinar, and I promise to answer as many questions as possible at the end of the presentation. So agronomy is defined as the study of soil science and crop production. For this discussion, let's assume that agronomic conditions include the following 5 major considerations when comparing organic and conventional row crop production. I've identified those major aspects as soil health, fertility and sustainability, weed control, effects on the environment, and probably most important, yield potential. Soil health has become a hot topic lately amongst conventional growers. Rodale has been studying and measuring soil health for many years on their on-farm comparison trials. The slide you're looking at is the published results of soil health based on a scientific measure of soil biology that was developed by Cornell University. Organic farmers have known for years why soil health is so important and why the new interest, and so we wonder why is the new interest from conventional farmers. But I've heard more than one farmer in some popular farm publications point to yield drag, especially in soybeans, with a finger aimed at soil health as one of the likely culprits. For those of us who have been practicing and or preaching about a biological farming system, soil health is not a new topic. We depend on the interaction of living organisms to promote plant growth and provide a balance of beneficial and competing detrimental actors in the system. We're not surprised when continued use of harsh chemical fertilizers and toxic pesticides diminish the number and balance of soil organisms for which biological farmers and advocates ultimately judge as the measure of soil health. Some crops, namely corn, can and do produce exceptional yields under the chemical farming system. Corn yields are driven by nitrogen, and the plant doesn't seem to discriminate between the highly soluble fossil fuel derived forms like anhydrous ammonia and natural forms derived from plant and animal sources such as green manure and animal manure. The process of the biological farming system is very complex, but it can be broken down as the process of decomposition of raw organic materials such as manure and plant residues back into plant available nutrients. The process includes a complex food chain that includes rodents, earthworms, and other insects all the way down to microscopic fungi and single cell microbes. A disruption in the soil food chain can cause an imbalance. Corn containing the Bt gene and other applications of insecticides will eliminate both target and non-target beneficial insects. So on the first category, soil health, we'll give the award to the organic system. Not that long ago, conventional farming was a clear winner in its ability to create a fertile soil environment for growing crops. Starting in the 1960s, commercial fertilizers became readily available, were relatively cheap, and convenient to use compared to manure. They were a perfect companion for newly developed high-yielding hybrid seeds and to farmers who were happy to specialize in row crop grains and leave the livestock production to a new and different breed of farmer that specialized in livestock production. The popular nitrogen fertilizer anhydrous ammonia is used on many conventional farms. In the organic world, we believe it's poisonous to earthworms and other soil life, and as a result is linked to soil compaction. My friend and mentor, Gary Zimmer, author of several biological farming books, always said he was willing to work with conventional farmers to improve soil health unless they insisted to use anhydrous ammonia. Livestock manure has and probably will continue to be the fertilizer of choice for organic farmers. Crop rotations and green manure crops have increasingly been added to the organic farmer's toolbox to bridge the fertility gap. Rodale pioneered the research and promoted compost many years ago. Reading about it in their New Farm magazine inspired me to do the same on my farm, using manure and litter from the chicken operation as the major ingredient. I can remember talking to conventional farmers at field days where composting was being demonstrated, and they were quite skeptical when they saw the test that showed the end product was somewhat low in nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, the NPK values that they were used to using to determine fertilizer value. I've come to recognize that NPK is not what compost is all about. It's actually about inoculating the soil with the valuable microbes produced by the process. And done correctly, compost is a safe, stable, and sustainable product. And more recently, attention to soil mineralization and balance can bring organic fertility within reach of its conventional counterparts. The newest innovation involves biostimulants, which are being promoted in both systems. One crucial element of the fertility argument is sustainability, and perhaps on that issue alone, I would give the nod to the organic system because it relies mostly on renewable resources, and most conventional fertilizers are produced using fossil fuels. The focus of this webinar was mostly dedicated to traditional row crops of corn and soybeans. However, I did want to discuss how more than those two crops are generally common practice on organic farms, and maybe the conventional farms could take a cue from them as well. Growing up on a traditional Midwest farm, a corn-soybean rotation seemed ideal. There was and is a ready market for those two crops. When you pulled into the local elevator with a load of grain in the fall, you were asked, corn or beans? And you would be directed to the appropriate grain pit for unloading. Everyone at the time recognized that corn planted The year after soybeans had a greener, healthier look after emergence. Farmers were provided with the formula for reducing nitrogen applications based on how many bushels of beans were harvested the previous year. Our farm was a little different because we raised alfalfa for our cattle feeding operation, and on our home farm, at least, we didn't always grow soybeans. So when I went into organic farming, I was immediately confronted with the reality that I didn't know much about crops other than corn and soybeans. My choice for the third rotation crop was small grains, and it's been that way for a lot of the other organic growers. Because because my goal was to be self-sufficient in growing my own grains for the chicken operation, I had to go back to my old animal science nutrition book to find the small grain that would work best in a poultry feed ration. It ended up my go-to grain was triticale, which I interseeded into the soybean canopy just as the leaves were turning color with a high boy spreader. Triticale, at about 1/4 of my ration in the poultry ration, provided additional methionine, which is a limiting amino acid in poultry production. There are a variety of options for other organic small grains in the rotation, including wheat, rye, hybrid rye, barley, oats, and a number of heritage type grains. There are markets for both feed and seed production for these crops. Straw sales are also an option. The early small grain harvest opens a critical window for applying manure and establishing cover crops for the next year's corn crop. A typical process for me was to have liquid dairy manure applied immediately after harvest of small grain, usually in about August. And as soon as ground could be worked, I typically seeded a mix of oats, turnips, or radishes, and red clover. The oats and radishes would winter kill, and a stand of nitrogen fixing clover could be worked in as a green manure ahead of corn planting. One of the benefits that I really appreciated about this rotation was how it spread out seasonal field work. Organic farmers know well the stress of timely cultivation of row crops, and it's nice to have 1/3 of your acres not needing attention at the same time. Aside from small grains or other alternative crops that could fit into a crop rotation, the most adventuresome I got was growing a crop of sunflowers one season. The agronomic results were good, but storage and marketing were really challenging. Anyone new to organic farming would be wise to seek some help in designing a crop rotation well suited for their farm. This is something that Rodale consultants do every day, and we have a wealth of expertise to draw from, including an impressive marketing department that helps match farmers to available markets. Weed control. Weed control is a major function of crop yields and has long been the bane of organic growers. I've heard the nasty comments about weed choked fields of corn and especially soybeans in poorly managed organic fields. What you don't hear about or see are the organic fields that are indistinguishable from their conventional counterparts. Certainly, organic growers have a ways to go when it comes to achieving the perfectly clean fields where chemicals and not cultivators rid the fields of unwanted weeds. But that perception may be changing. Organic farmers are upping their cultural control practices using technology like GPS and camera guided row cultivators, tine weeders, and electric weed zappers. According to my brother who farms in northern Missouri, he's a conventional farmer. Chemical control on conventional farms is becoming less and less effective due mostly to weed resistance. Gone are the pure stands of soybeans. Prolific invasions of giant ragweed and Palmer amaranth, for example, are common in fields treated with some of the popular herbicides on the market. Resistant weeds have become so common that one organic farmer I know in Illinois is getting requests from his conventional neighbors to custom zap some of their fields, in addition to his own and other organic customers. Newer or improved chemical herbicides have not appeared on the conventional market, and none seem to be in the works. Conventional farmers are forced to increase rates, which just increases resistance, or rotate with other herbicides that are less resistant to problem weeds, but less effective overall. Some certified organic herbicides have been developed over the years, but are mostly relegated to high-value specialty crops. Organic row crop farmers appear content with their cultural control practices that may still achieve less than perfect weed control, but don't significantly reduce yield. I think there's a strong pride issue here as well. And I can remember one of my organic neighbors lamenting about one of his less than perfect looking fields. And he said, quote, "Yeah, it's always the field next to the road that gets it the worst." So this is a picture of probably the pinnacle of my organic farming career. In about 2015, I produced 59 bushels the acre beans on it's about a 20-acre farm. And I'd still to this day, I don't know that I did anything exceptionally different. So sometimes you just get lucky, I guess. So Midwest farmers are heavily motivated by yield, which is understandable given that yield is 1/2 of the total income equation. Bushels of yield times price per bushel equals income per acre. Most organic farmers would concede that their conventional counterparts have held the advantage in yield potential over the years, mostly due to the more consistent weed control and relatively inexpensive fertilizers. But here again is where organic farmers seem to be catching up. Yield data for organic crop yields is not as available as it is for conventional. However, I did come across a USDA study that cited some 115 farms, I believe, that showed the organic yields of row crops were about 80% of conventional yields in the area. From my own experiences and observations here in the Midwest, organic yields may not be quite as consistent as conventional, but is very impressive when everything comes together to push crops to the max. Here again is that 59 bushel per acre yield. And this field was cultivated twice, no hand weeding, was soybeans following organic seed corn. It was moldboard plowed in the spring. And I think 2 cultivations. This was a picture from the second cultivation. Some years ago, I also produced a corn yield of 258 bushels per acre on a small plot near our poultry farm. This plot received an abundance of poultry litter and dry starter fertilizer containing potassium, humates, and trace minerals. In reviewing production records this past summer as part of my job as an organic inspector, I also observed evidence that organic crop yields appear to be trending upwards. The evidence included visual observation of the crops in the field and verification of crop production and sales records required as part of the inspection. The most consistent high-yielding crops I observed were on Amish farms in Iowa. Soybean yields were consistently above 60 bushels per acre, and corn yields 180 bushels and up. Some of the Amish had tractors at their disposal, while others tilled and cultivated their row crops with horse-drawn implements. The common theme on these farms was an abundance of manure, moldboard plowing, and some level of the use of biostimulants. While there are plenty of success stories in the organic world, there have been plenty of failures as well. An infestation of giant ragweed, for instance, can result in near total crop failure. There is a steep learning curve when adopting organic farming methods, and unfortunately, its opponents are quick to point out the worst outcomes. For the purpose of this study, I'm sticking to yield potential and not actual yield records and making an assessment of the economic outcomes, as reliable yield data for organic crops is not widely available. Given all that I would have to give conventional farming a slight edge in yield potential, probably close to the 20% estimate from USDA. Our analysis of crop profits will look at 2 scenarios: organic yields at 80% of conventional and at 100% of conventional. Organic yields, however, appear to be trending up, while conventional yields appear to be stagnant or trending down. For soybeans, I believe organic yields may actually someday surpass conventional yields due to the biological nature of the soybean plant and its ability to respond to the soil health benefits of organic management. The only significant difference in seed genetics between organic and conventional is the addition of genetically modified organisms in the conventional seeds. While genetics are similar, organic certification prohibits many of the chemical seed treatments available to the conventional grower. Overall, I believe the issue of seed genetics it's basically a wash. Having followed the organic industry closely for so many years, I do have some ideas on why organic is catching up in the area of yield potential. Number one, during the industry's boom years in the 1990s and early 2000s, many new producers rushed into organics with little or no experience and knowledge of how to produce consistently good yielding crops with organic methods. Many of those left early in the process, left the business. Number two, the organic growers who remain today are more skilled and equipped to achieve profitable yields. Number three, the organic industry has developed new products and processes that are putting more grain in the bin. Number four, organic farmers have a support system that provides unbiased research and assistance. Rodale Institute, its consulting group in particular, has been part of that. But it's organic farmers themselves with their own selfish sharing of ideas that has probably been the most effective driver of improved production practices. Rodale Institute has conducted one of the most comprehensive farm trials comparing organic and conventional corn yields from 2008 to 2020. Organic plots featured both manure-based and legume-based fertilizer treatments. These systems were compared side by side with a typical conventional system using synthetic fertilizers. This research, based in Pennsylvania, showed the organic corn consistently out-yielded the conventional and had a 31% advantage in drought years. These trials also compared carbon capture and water retention. The manure-based organic system rated highest in soil health, while both organic systems outperformed conventional in carbon capture and water retention. Conventional corn and soybean yields have been relatively flat over the past 10 years. This is somewhat surprising considering conventional grain prices have surged over that time and should have motivated producers to up their game and push for higher yields. That really doesn't seem to have happened. Is it possible the industry is no longer coming up with the technological advances that drove yield increases in the previous decades? Conventional soybean producers are especially concerned about reduced herbicide effectiveness due to weed resistance. Soaring fertilizer prices may have also put a drag on corn yields. I do want to make it clear I'm not critical of conventional farmers personally, just conventional practices. I have a brother, sister, and a nephew, and a number of friends who are conventional farmers. The hard work, and I think they work hard, and I think they are genuine in their love of the land. I just think now may be the time for some of them to take a closer look at organic farming and how it might make them better farmers. It's going on 50 years since last time I personally used pesticides and fertilizers that were common in that day. I was exposed to these chemicals in my youth simply by living and working on the farm and drinking the water and breathing the air. During planting time, I recall being able to identify the insecticides my neighbors were using by driving past their fields and recognizing the distinct odor. I experienced direct pesticide exposure on several occasions that was severe enough to cause illness, but not severe enough to require medical attention. My friend and classmate Dan Bulow was not so lucky. He was exposed to an insecticide during planting. Every farmer in those days used a dry insecticide applied in a narrow band on top of the row with the planter. Most farmers at the time did not wear masks or gloves, and my friend's exposure was magnified, his doctor said, due to the fact that he chewed gum while he was working in the field. He was hospitalized for several days and suffered from chronic sinus headaches in the years following that incident. In his early 50s, Dan was diagnosed with inoperable brain cancer and died following several years of painful treatment. I'm not attempting to make this direct causal argument about a connection to farm chemicals and cancer. There were other factors in Dan's case for sure, including that his family does have a history of severe cancers. I have had friends who were longtime organic farmers with no direct exposure to farm chemicals who succumbed to cancer as well. Drawing a conventional farming methods and human health is something I should probably leave to the doctors and scientists. But the evidence of farm chemicals invading our environment is hard to dispute. Just the issue of nitrate polluted water alone is undeniable and represents a serious threat to both human health and aquatic life. Beyond the non-point pollution, environmentalists and others now are concerned about agriculture's contribution to greenhouse gas pollution that is driving climate change. Synthetic nitrogen fertilizers have been identified as one of agriculture's most consequential greenhouse gas emission problems in the form of nitrous oxide. On the plus side, agriculture has also been identified as a potential resource in reversing climate change. By the way, I have an economist friend who insists on calling it climate disruption and not climate change. So that's kind of his opinion. But so this has spurred incentives to farmers to plant cover crops and utilize no-till planting as a way to store carbon. From a soil erosion standpoint, I think these practices are beneficial and worthwhile. However, I have my doubts that they are generating the carbon sequestration benefits some are projecting, especially in conventional farms. I suspect the difference between the two systems is due to inefficient cycling of crop residues and other raw organic matter in the conventional system. Once again, the Rodale farm trials did find organic management, especially the manure-based systems, showed the organic system captured more carbon than the conventional. There is quite a debate concerning carbon sequestration and how to measure it at the farm level. There are any number of carbon credit programs that promise to deliver carbon emission reduction on farms, but they are mostly based on practices farmers have implemented and are not an objective measure of the actual sequestration. Some only reward new practices, so the farmers who implemented them many years ago are not eligible for payment. The system referred to as, quote, carbon markets can only achieve net zero carbon. A better system should be able to achieve actual carbon reduction on farms. I've always been of the school that soil organic matter is a good indication of the level of carbon in the soil. Gary Zimmer also uses a formula that every 1% of soil organic matter shows that there will be 10 tons of carbon stored in the soil. To develop a fair system for compensating for carbon sequestration and equivalent emissions, an objective measuring tool is needed. Farmers in Great Britain do have a tool that objectively measures carbon footprint. It's called the Farm Carbon Calculator. It was originally created with a grant from the European Union and is free for any farmer in the country who wants to gauge his or her carbon footprint. Farmers enter their own data into a spreadsheet, and that includes fuel, fertilizer, crops, livestock, history of organic matter, and much more. This program spits out a result in metric tons of carbon sequestered per year. I ran hypothetical comparisons of two 500-acre farms, one a conventional corn soybean farm versus the same scale organic farm. The organic farm sequestered about 120 metric tons more carbon per year than the conventional model. While this is a hypothetical example of the carbon calculator, the software is used in Great Britain to calculate environmental subsidy payments and may soon be the basis for carbon food labeling. I expect that the U.S. food industry may follow suit and are probably in the process already of evaluating supply chains as part of claims such as net carbon zero to be used in advertising and food labels. I'm not in favor of mandating farming practice to achieve environmental goals such as carbon emission reductions. As we speak, European farmers are revolting against those kinds of measures, and the political climate here is even more divisive. But I think farmers should be aware and prepared to deal with the possibility that pressure from commodity grain buyers may include incentives and or discounts based on carbon footprint in the future as food brands look to include carbon footprint claim on their label. Going back to the beginning of the organic movement, I believe it was driven more by consumer demand than farmer initiative. The backlash to GMOs in grain and BST in milk provided the initial consumer groundswell that fed organic farming. Climate change could very well be at the center of a new wave toward organics. Because conventional agriculture offers so little in the way of environmental benefits, it's organic farming that comes out ahead here. So this is a list of pluses and minuses of the system. So you can see where the organic system checked the boxes on all the 6 different categories, and conventional only managed to come out on equal with organic on 2 of them. So now we're ready to share the information I came up with on profit analysis of the 2 systems, which is better, conventional, organic, or which produces the more profits. And so just FYI is where the data came from. I used the conventional crop production cost estimates from Iowa State University. I matched the same amount of seed used and figured the cost of that using organic seed catalogs that I have on hand here. The organic fertilizer was a tough one to do because it's all over the ballpark. So I just took the amount of P and K that conventional farmers used, and I matched that. Most organic farmers will buy some manure. Some farmers have plenty of manure on hand, and I had one manure salesman tell me that some organic farmers spend up to $500 an acre on manure for their organic farm, but they produce about 250 bushels to the acre. So I did put in there the extra cost for planting cover crops for both the corn and soybean crops. That included the cost of seed and the cost of the machinery to plant the seed. And that was custom machinery rates from ISU were used to do that. Also added in 2 trips over the field with the rotary hoe and 2 cultivations. ISU didn't include insecticides or fungicides. I thought it was more they did more of it than what they showed, but they didn't include it, so I didn't. Obviously, there's no pesticide, fungicide in the organic side. So first, we're going to take a look at a chart that shows all the per acre costs for both systems. And so I used the average yield that Iowa State came up with 3 different yield treatments for the corn. I took the middle one. I believe 182 bushels probably represents close to the average corn yield in Iowa. And then so the organic treatment, the one at 145.5 acres, would be 80% of the conventional yield, and 182 bushels per acre it would be the 100%. It's interesting to note the cost per acre for both conventional and organic were nearly identical. The conventional farms have higher fertilizer and pesticide costs, but that was offset on the organic side by the expense of planting cover crops, cultivating, and rotary hoeing for weed control. The per bushel cost for organic corn at the 80% yield level, 145 bushels the acre, was $1.12 per bushel more than the 182 bushels per acre conventional yield. But the organic corn cost per bushel is the same as the conventional if 182 bushel yield is achieved. But then you can see the premium price for organic corn at about $3.75 a bushel is what pushes the organic profitability to about $300 an acre more than conventional, assuming a doable yield of 145 bushels per acre. An organic farm producing 182 bushels per acre would see a whopping $680 per acre profit advantage. Both conventional and organic corn prices right now are at one of their lowest levels in several years. So the 182 bushel per acre yield is actually about 10 bushels over the national average from 2023, and at $4.02 per bushel shows a $91.54 loss. The bottom line here is that organic corn doesn't really cost any more per acre to grow than conventional, and because the organic price is $3.70 a bushel premium, there is a lot less margin for error in generating a profit. In fact, the break-even yield for organic corn figures out to 105.6 bushels per acre, while the conventional producer needs to come up with a yield of 207 bushels per acre to cover their expense. I put my money on the organic producer because I've seen them exceed the 105 bushel yield over and over again. Conventional farmers, I'm sure, do produce over and above 207 bushels per acre, but my guess is they are going into 2024 with hopes that their market will improve from the current $4.02 a bushel level. Anyone want to bet with that? The Iowa State University crop estimates also include a corn after corn scenario, which I didn't put a slide up for because organic generally requires a crop rotation. But no surprise, the cost of additional fertilizer, mostly nitrogen, pushes the cost per bushel about 60 to 70 cents higher, and the loss per bushel is $1.09 to $1.23 a bushel for conventional raised corn after corn. One area of note that affects both the organic and conventional sides in corn production is grain drying, which costs about 20 to 25 cents a bushel. And aside from the cost, I found this was also a significant source in carbon emissions that showed up when running the farm carbon calculator. Farmers can reduce or avoid this cost by selecting shorter season, better dry down herbicide or hybrids. Some of the Amish farms I inspect have zero drying costs because they pick their corn in the ear and let it dry over the winter in the crib. We'll move on to the soybeans. When it comes to soybeans, organic production is also a clear winner. Despite the expense of cover crops and mechanical cultivation, per acre costs are about $50 per acre lower on the organic side. This is about equal to the expense of herbicides and fertilizers on the conventional side. There is no fertilizer expense charged for the organic production because very few farmers I know use fertilizer in their soybean production. Perhaps some will use some potassium sulfate now and then. On the profit per acre table, you can see how the premium for organic soybeans drives gross income and return per acre. It never ceases to amaze me why more U.S. farmers aren't growing organic soybeans. In fact, nearly 80% of the organic soybeans used in the U.S., is mostly in poultry diets, comes from overseas. Yeah, it can be a challenging crop to grow, but I've seen it done very successfully. The break-even yield for conventional soybeans figures out to a little more than 57 bushels per acre, which I believe many growers can achieve. However, the national average is still only 51.5 bushels per acre for conventional. Weed control is an obvious factor in soybean yields. At the same time, organic growers appear to be improving in that area. Weeds are becoming more of an issue for conventional farmers. I had an organic grower, I already told that. In examining the overall demand for both organic and conventional grains, there are several factors at work. The driving factor for organic corn and soybeans is for use in animal feeds. There's a limited but potentially lucrative market for feed grade corn and soybeans. The major organic feed market is in the poultry layer sector, which is expected to grow in the coming year, according to Mercaris economist Alexander Schultz, who spoke recently at the O-Grain conference in Madison, Wisconsin. Overall, organic grain production is projected to increase by 1% this year. Corn acreage is set to increase by 5%, while soybean acreage is projected to fall by 4%. Well, it's been close to 50 years since I last handled farm pesticides. And after you get used to the idea of not using it, it kind of becomes a lifestyle. And all these many years later, and I'm not farming, living in town, I still don't ever feel compelled to use any pesticides or fertilizers in my lawn or garden. And I did appreciate my years of organic farming, that we had young kids growing up on the farm, and we didn't have a shed anywhere that had these dangerous chemicals stored around them. So that gave us a little bit of a sense of added security with our kids growing up. And it's been a long time ago, but having been both a conventional and organic farmer at one time, I can tell you there's great satisfaction in producing a crop without the crutches modern agriculture provides. The result, I believe, is healthier soils, plants, livestock, and people. This concludes my presentation. I hope you will refer to Rodale's vast library of knowledge or reach out to the consulting staff through their website. Also, feel free to email me, or if you have any questions, or just want to talk farming and get into a debate over the information in the webinar. So that concludes the webinar. We have some time for questions. What are FT and RT in this slide? Huh. That one, you could maybe type a question a little more. I'm not sure which side. I wasn't watching the Q&A during the slideshow, so I'm not sure. I think Margaret has my email. She wants to email me that. And somebody commented that it also produces healthier foods. Can you indicate scientific studies showing this fact? It wasn't the specific studies I can refer you to are not in the amount of pesticides that are found in the foods, but it's in the nutritional value of the foods. And I don't have those at my fingertip, but I've seen them. That's a pretty conclusive thing that happens when you study organic versus conventional food health. Another comment or question about yield per acre is misleading, since organic farms usually are mixed farms. I tried to cover that a little bit in the cover crop section. So the thing that's changed a little bit, when I first started the crop rotation the third year, and we kind of assumed that we were going to lose money or break even at best. And now people are getting a little smarter about the kinds of crops they grow and finding markets for them. And they might not produce as much profit as soybeans or corn, but they can make a reasonable profit on. Okay, somebody has a question about the farm carbon calculator, how it's different from the Comet farm planner. And that's really how I got involved in looking for something that was a more accurate measure. I went through the Comet planner, and it's used by NRCS, so that they can estimate when a farm implements certain conservation practices, or plants cover crops or no-tills, and it will give you an average of what those actual practices will provide, but it doesn't give you an overall farm number. The farm carbon calculator looks at your fuel use, and it's just a more comprehensive program for determining that carbon footprint. And somebody's asking, got way out of my asking about textile brands. Somebody in our consulting group will know definite answer to this. And she also brings up regenerative agriculture. I was going to put something in this, but I got to tell you, that is a topic for a whole nother webinar, and hopefully stay tuned that somebody at Rodale will address that. I'm just now getting acclimated to what the regenerative organic ROC is, what Rodale supports, because that also requires organic certification. Another one, the comment is, since organic seed is more costly, or more organic farmers saving their seed? Absolutely, they can do it with soybeans, but they have to make sure they have to be non-GMO to begin with, so they're allowed to save those seeds. You run into some issues with finding a place to clean the seeds. I think cover crop seeds is sort of a no-brainer. I know a lot of people that grow rye, and they leave 5 or 10 acres to harvest for seed, and then they'll have their seed, because that rye seed, when you're covering every acre, gets to be kind of expensive. Why do I think more farmers don't switch to organic? Years of transition, is that a reason? Transition can be an issue. It's I think the biggest reason why you don't see more organic is the conventional farmers today. They just want to grow. Their idea of increasing profitability is, I only make so much on every bushel or on every acre, and so I need to have bushels and acres to drive my business. And the organic, I'm seeing more larger farms organic, but it's not suited for the mega-sized farms. I'd say like 5,000 acres or more. Yep, somebody else would like to see more analysis of the other crops in the rotation. That's a good idea, I think. And for sure, if I was consulting with somebody to do transition, that would be included in their projections for cost analysis and all that. Another one asked if I use no-till. I did once. I did a roller crimper once where I farmed. We got a lot of rocks, and it just didn't seem to be, the no-till planters wasn't the best idea. But honestly, for soybeans, what I see is, and what I experienced as a farmer was, moldboard plowing in the spring almost always got the best weed control and the best yields. But that's not saying, that the no-till soybeans could work. They got a long ways to go on no-till corn, I guess, but people are trying it, and they'll make progress. Can we have your PowerPoint? You'll have to ask Rodale for that. And is there a published report for your profitability data? All that would be is what's on this PowerPoint, and I believe you can access it. Whether they'll send you a copy of it, I don't know. This is being recorded, and it'll be put into the Rodale library, and so I don't know what the policy is for sending those out. I've got questions here in the chat too. Could you explain more about why organic isn't suited for farms of 5,000 acres? I can tell you, the bigger farms, you'd have to have so much equipment and so much help, because when these cultivation operations need to be done, it's not this day, it's this hour. And that's my opinion, I guess, that you wouldn't do it on a big farm, because I can tell you on a small farm, it was very, very difficult to get everything done on time. And our weather patterns are actually making it tougher every day or every year to get the amount of field work done that you need. Somebody's worried about organic farms pretending to be organic. That's, my job as an inspector, and so we try to go over all their inputs, and that's right, they could be hiding them somewhere, but I do pretty thorough inspections. I look inside farmers' planter boxes and check to see if there's sign of treated seed going through there. I ask if they have a sprayer on hand, and then the biggest risks is farmers that have both organic and conventional crops growing on the same farm, and called parallel production. And so somebody else was wondering if it's possible to avoid monocropping while remaining economically viable. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's more profitable if people just, give it a chance. Okay, somebody answered the hemp question. That's good. Another one was talking about the zappers and whether or not intertwining cover crops with row crops. I think that's coming. I saw years ago where farmers planted soybeans in wide rows into their wheat fields, and their combine tracks were set so that when they combined the wheat, they didn't drive on the soybeans, and the soybeans would just go crazy once that wheat came off. And it looked like a good system. I think it's something I'd like to see somebody try. I think it has some merit. Okay, thanks to Kathleen for putting something in the chat. I appreciate that. I'll probably see her at the lacrosse conference coming up. Okay, these are all good comments. I appreciate it. And so if you missed something, and you can get on later and watch the and watch the rerun of it, you'll be able to pick it up again. Where do I source organic seeds? I still get seed catalogs from places like Albert Lee Seed, Welter Seeds. And so I grab those, and just to check what this year's prices on the organic seeds are. Let's see, Tyler's going to be an intern. He'll have fun. Anyone that ever gets a chance to tour the Rodale farm, that was like a highlight of my whole organic career, was 2 years ago, having a chance to tour the the trials and the Rodale farm in Kutztown. So I don't see any more questions. It's 2 o'clock. And with that, I guess we'll conclude the webinar. Thank you, everybody, for dialing into this, and good luck in your farming adventures. Thank you very much.